Well, hello, beautiful.
Hello, young man, handsome. How are you?
I'm doing well. I hear that you have new toys.
Oh, yes, I got myself a new computer, a new desktop, and a new laptop.
I see honeycomb creeping in the background of my
Up there.
screen. Yeah, let me whoops. Let me see if I can fix that real quick. Hey, looky there. Now it's just a bee.
It's just a bee. I've got storage boxes and I've got Les Crowder's books on the side. And so you guys don't mind me. That new computer, that desktop has a wide angle and I haven't adapted yet to it. So everything's showing in the field of vision. That is,
Not a problem. I mean, you know what? It's an office and it's still, even though you have like these things here and there, it still looks very organized. And
yeah. You're not
it's
seeing what's closer to the desk.
I can't see the ground. You're right. I can't see what is down below all that. So there we go. Okay, now I'm
There you go.
fixed. So now we've got the
Back
cherry blossoms in the background.
the
Um,
screen.
yeah, that's literal. The honeycomb that was creeping in was the digital aspect, and I didn't have the green screen set up today, so I was running a little behind. But no, you've got these nice bookshelves over there. Everything over
I've
there
got
is all nice
comb
and
too.
organized.
This is comb.
That is comb sitting on the very top
Yeah,
shelf. You're right. It's
yeah,
top bar comb
that's right.
with the rescue bar on the bottom of it.
Yes, I think so. Wow,
Yeah.
you can really see. You told me that you couldn't see the details.
I
As I was
said,
complaining, the definition was too good for my comfort, wrinkles and
no,
everything.
you are glowing and beautiful. I have really good eyes and I'm very keen on what that looks like because I do it
Right.
all the time. So it
Yeah,
just
thank
it
you.
just jumped out at me. But no,
Right.
it all looks good. So um while we're having these random conversations about space and organization, that oddly enough leads into today's topic.
That's exactly right. Space management.
Space management and organization. So this is not meant to be no matter how it may come off for our audience out there. By this point, you know that we are all uh partial to top bar style hives.
Both of us. Me, I'm
Uh-huh.
the extremist. I'm the soapbox person.
Yes. And I try to be more encompassing, but at the same time, I do prefer that. And there are legitimate reasons for those types of preferences. And so we're going to talk about that today because what I have been doing the last 2 weekends is building an expansion to my storage shed to literally double the space because I need places to store things.
For which type of hive?
Well, it just so happens it's Langstroth's fault.
Uh,
So if it was just top bars, if I had my one single hive that is up here at the moment, if it were a top bar hive, I would need storage space for maybe a 5 gallon bucket full of extra bars, maybe some of those with the rescue wire already attached to it, and two more 5 gallon buckets that I use for my crush and strain, and then the strainer that actually goes into them. And that would be it. I would be done because everything else would be out in the field in the apiary. I wouldn't need any additional space. But I did have about half of my hives. All of them were Langstroth. And the one hive that I have now is Langstroth. Langstroth has frames. These specific frames have at least wire, if not plastic foundation. And therefore, they have an extractor. I actually have two extractors. I have a portable remote hand crank 2 frame extractor that is one of the tangential extractors extractors, and then I've got one of the larger 8 frame radial extractors that's electric and motor powered because cranking those things suck. And those two things need a place to stay. I have, just for this one hive, I have at least 5 additional boxes, all full of frames. I've got a couple of bags of frames that have drawn comb that have been preserved and are ready for storage. And all that stuff needs somewhere to go. Now, that's also not counting all of the plastic nuke boxes that I have, that because I kept all of those despite selling everything else. That is both the
the easy
hard
peasy.
shell. Well, it's both. It's the hard shell plastic solid ones and the easy Jester Nuke
Easy.
type corrugated plastic ones, both. So I've got both of those. So And that's one hive, guys. That's just one hive and future potential splits and or swarm trap catch type things. And that's all. We're not talking 4 or 5 colonies. We're just talking one.
That's
so
right.
way back in the day on I think it was the first season of the podcast, I told a story about going to Canada and doing some consulting work with Hannigan Honey up there. And at the time, Hannigan Honey ran 1,500 Langstroth hives.
Oh
They
my.
were expanding to 2,000 to 2,500, and they had a rotation set up where there was always about 500 off to the side that were nukes that were going to be the next year's incoming colonies.
Right.
And then the ones that were 3 years old rotated out and got broken back up and used for other purposes. So I got to go tour their storage facility. It was a warehouse that was 2 to 3 times the size of a traditional red barn that you would see on a farm. It was massive. It was floor to ceiling medium boxes with comb in them, plus stacks and pallets that had all the bottom boards or all the lids, all the inner covers, this types of stuff. And it looked like a Tetris maze. You walk in and you actually curve all the way through all this stuff, and they're just everywhere, floor to ceiling. And the ceiling was up there. We're talking like 30-foot ceilings, and it was all the way up. Thousands upon thousands of boxes. So if you just think about 1,500 colonies and you assume that is at the average time of the season, 1 box, because they overwinter theirs in a single deep or a deep and a medium. Right. And then whenever you add in, well, they can stack in their flow, they can stack up to 9 boxes on top of that single hive. So 9 times 1,500.
Insane.
That's a lot of crap that you have to store.
Well, you have to spend money on that storage area. You have to, all
they
that
built
money
one.
Also invested into that equipment.
That's right.
That's expensive.
It is very expensive. And when I first started off, I did start off with 2 Langstroth colonies. And then when I became keen on top bar and started realizing that I could use the top bar with the rescue bar method to do my removals, it was much less stuff for me to carry around. It was way easier to manipulate and do. And my removal success rate, not the removal itself, but the survival and capture rate of the colony without them dying or absconding went up into like the 90 percentile just from switching from Langstroth to the top bar. Oh God. And it was like maybe 50, maybe sometimes 30. I mean, it was not pretty when I was trying to do the Langstroth stuff. And you have to have all that additional equipment that goes along with it. And I lived at the time in Austin. When I first started, I was in a duplex. I was on the tiny side of a duplex because I traded it out for the massive backyard. It was this beautiful setup because I'm an outdoors person. So the house on one side of the duplex was 3 bedroom, 2 bath. They had a big front yard, but their backyard was this tiny sliver. On the other side, it was a 2 bedroom, 1 bath, very small little house with a tiny sliver, basically big enough for an extra parking spot in the front on the other side of the driveway. But the backyard was massive. It was like bigger than the whole front and the house and it was awesome. And that's where I originally had the 2 colonies. That's where I originally had the chickens. That's where I had the pond with the waterfall and the stream and all that fun stuff. And there was a storage shed out there. The lawnmower had to park beside the storage shed because the storage shed was full of bee stuff. So when I learned
to protect from the elements because it's 3/4 of an inch thick.
Right? Exactly.
And and it's got,
Yeah. You don't want anything bad happening to all of it. You got to keep it protected. And in fact, I think there was a stack of older boxes behind the storage shed, between the storage shed and the fence as well, because there wasn't enough room. So, and that was just the 2 colonies that I had, plus the first few removals that I was doing that were going into Langstroth colonies as well. And I was building nuke boxes to hold them and all this other stuff. And so storage just got ridiculous. Switching over to a top bar, all of that went away. And I spent 3 years diligently working to get rid of all of my Langstroth colonies so that I could get down to just top bars. And at one point, 80% of my colonies were all top bar.
Oh, and wow. That's good.
Then all this random stuff started happening because by then I was the president of the Travis County Beekeepers Association. I was a director for the Texas Beekeepers Association. I had my business entities. My name was out there. We were doing youth scholarship programs. We were helping with all this stuff. I was helping schools set up programs for beekeeping for their elementary schools, and we were putting them out there on the school properties. Like, all this stuff was going on. So, and then the podcast was going on. And by that point, when somebody would get into beekeeping and they would decide that it wasn't for them, or if the bees started causing a problem and they were in town and they had to go somewhere, all these other things started coming up. Slowly but surely, I started inheriting colonies that people couldn't manage or didn't want, or whatever the case was. Then COVID happened and all the schools shut down, and most of the schools had to do something with their colonies. So those got donated back to the apiary. And pretty soon, by the time it came time for me to start liquidating things before I left Texas, I had a majority of all my colonies were Langstroths, and I was pissed.
No wonder you got it. What I remember is that you got rid of it for a ridiculously low price.
Oh, that pile of stuff that I put out in front of my house, that was all of the extra equipment that came from both my garage, the attic, and a storage facility that I was paying rent on. And I cleaned it all out. I put it in the driveway. I took a picture of it. And I was basically like, $200, make this shit go away.
And I remember you were talking about selling this stuff, and you were, I don't know how much I should be selling it for. And then you posted the picture and the ad on Facebook. And when I saw the price, I was like, I want it. But by then somebody like,
oh God, yeah. It was like 30 seconds after posting it, my phone just started going ding, 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 ding. And people were like, are you crazy?
I was not going to wanted to use it necessarily, although I do have some Langstroth equipment, but I was like, well, for the club, anybody, can sell it to some people that are looking for equipment that's used and all stuff. Yeah.
It was a bargain, and it was really hard to pass up. Even if you are somebody that's just straight top bar, you were like, what the hell?
You had Ross rounds equipment and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
I did. I had 2 setups of Ross rounds plus one that was never even opened and built yet, brand new. I had all the additional cartridges and containers and things for them so that you could switch them out and put the clamshells over them once they were drawn, and like all this stuff. Oh my God, it was ridiculous.
So that's what I tell people that are starting. And it's like, you really want to kind of think about what your goals are and what your circumstances are. So do you have any storage space, or do you not? Do you have commercial reasons to keep bees? Like, you want to sell honey, you want to do production, you want to go volume, you want to do all kinds of stuff. At that point, that kind of guides what kind of hive you're going to want to kind of look into. And when you're taking classes, most people will tell you Langstroth, because everybody else has got it. That's fine, but that's mostly the configuration for commercial beekeeping and making an income with the bees in a way. Not that you cannot with top bars. We're making a killing less than like with top bar hives, and I can, that's something for another episode. But the point is that any single hive that you have with Langstroth, to your point, is going to require a lot of equipment. When you're harvesting, actually, when you get started in the spring, you have 1 deep of whatever size you have.
I'm gonna interrupt you real quick. You probably can't see that, but Ken Milam is calling me.
Oh, hi, Ken. So
sorry, Ken, you're gonna have to go to voicemail, and I'll call you back
for now until but you got 1 deep, and then all of a sudden you've got to run or prep to have a super on, because you have to add equipment. You cannot put all that space up front on top of the hive. That's the other aspect of this, the space management in the hive. There's space management for the equipment, and then there's space management for the hive itself. When you get started, you don't want to give them too much space because it's highly stressful, especially with that chimney effect. So what happens is that every time you go to an apiary, especially if you have several of them, you have to think about potentially being prepared. So now you're transporting a whole bunch of boxes. What if they don't need it quite yet? You have to take them back and restock them in your storage facility. And you do that until they need it. Then they fill it up. Then you have to harvest that box. So you bring it back, you extract it, you have all that equipment now, wet frames and comb that potentially is great for wax moths and mice and all the stuff that, what do you do with it?
And if you take those wet frames and you put them back on the colony temporarily for them to clean them up, you're now
You've brought it
greatly
back again.
maximizing the amount of times you're touching and messing with stuff. So you've taken them from the colony, you've extracted them, then you take them back to the colony, then you have to take them back off of the colony quickly before they turn around and start using them again. Like,
Yes.
so not only is it the space aspect, but the management aspect, you're like tripling the amount of times that you had to touch the colony just to do this one task.
Yes. And then you have to have the right number of frames in the space, right? So you have to always, if you're doing any kind of manipulations, like for example, that example of the super, first of all, if you're putting a medium on top of a deep, now those frames are not matching.
You can't mix
So
match. They've got to, that's
you,
exactly right. They've
you
got to
can
stay
potentially
separate.
put a frame of medium and in a deep, but you cannot do the opposite.
Right.
I
And
don't
if
know.
you
I
do
do it
put
all the
that
time.
frame down there, they will draw out comb on the bottom of it, and it'll be natural free hanging comb with no support and no foundation. And more than likely, if you're doing all foundation frames, it's going to
Drones.
be all drone comb because they don't have anywhere else to put them.
And it's fine. That's healthy for the colony.
Yeah, it is. But then also later, if you forget that and you go back and you take something out and say they do cap that with honey or something else, you're like, oh crap. Now I've got like this half a frame, half of it's hanging off the bottom. It's older wax that's been used for larvae and stuff. So I can't use it for honeycomb. I'd have to crush and strain it, or like, what do I do with it? Or it breaks off because you pick it up and don't realize that it's attached. Like, it just causes some problems.
Another space management issue, you have 8 frames equipment, you have 10 frames equipment. If you have both of them, then all of a sudden you cannot, as much as you want, mix and match them. So you might have a stack of 10 frames that you cannot use because you've got the majority of those in your yard being 8 frames, and then you potentially mess up and bring the 10 frames to your yard, and then you've got, oh man, I thought I had the right sizes. Now I have to go back and switch it again. Ask me how I know. I cannot stand it.
I do it all the time. Well, when I started inheriting things, I never had 8 frame equipment. And then Ken bought all that crap, and most all of that was 8 frame equipment. And then some of the stuff that I inherited from some of the listeners and some of our customers and all these other people was 8 frame equipment. And suddenly I have 10 frames is what I was doing. Then I've got 8 frame. So I go out and I take boxes back out into the field, and I'm putting boxes on hives when it's time to do increase for the spring. And it's exactly what you said. I turn around and I look and I'm like, oh, well, shit, that's a 10 frame box. I need an 8 frame box. Well, I don't have an 8 frame box on my truck, but I've got all these extra comb. Like, so exactly. Or I didn't have the bottom board, or I've got the lid for the 8 and not the 10, and it doesn't cover it all the way. And you're like, ah.
Now, if it's an 8 frame and you have a 10 frame lid, you can put it on top.
Yes, but not the other way around.
That can work.
Right. Yeah. So you see, it causes some conundrums.
Okay, for all the calls for standardization and the talk of Langstroth is easier because everything is standardized. Well, it's not really true.
To a degree, it's standardized.
The depth and the width and the suppliers,
right?
Not everything matches.
Right.
And
if you do, it's Man Lake. If you do Man Lake, their size is like this. But here, I don't know. Actually, for people that can't see, this is not going to make any sense. But their width is a set width, and it's either the width or the actual thickness of the wood, one or the other. And then Dadant, even though the internal dimensions are identical inside a deep from Dadant and a deep from Man Lake, if you stick those 2 Langstroth boxes on top of each other, one of them overlaps and overhangs the other one on the external dimensions. So then you end up with oddities like that too, where technically the inside's fine, but now you got this weird lip on the outside. Or, you're like, what is this?
Which is fine under the box that's sticking out. But if it's a box that's on the bottom, and then you have one that's more narrow, then you have the wood that's exposed to the elements that can introduce a lot of moisture and might make it rot as well. So
exactly.
That's something to keep in mind. Okay. So another aspect of things is that when you're transporting all that stuff and you're trying to make splits, then you have to take into account, you have to have those nuke boxes, but then you're pulling out a certain number of frames, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're limited to those 5 in those nuke boxes, by the way. And then you have to make sure that you have the frames to put back in there. Again, make sure that's the right size.
Right.
And all that stuff, I'm constantly transporting frames, which if you're not putting them in a box, you have them and they're getting shambles in the back of your truck, and it's a nightmare to grab a handful of them at a time, right? Whereas you get a bucket of bars that contains, I think, 30 is
They
how
all
much I can put
they
in
all
there.
stay in one spot.
It's a stick of wood.
That's right.
So it's super easy. They're all interchangeable. When you go into a top bar hive and you're doing anything, let's say you're harvesting comb honey, which is the most valuable one. It's twice as much as liquid honey. You can just slice it off in the recipient that you're going to take home, like a plastic
Yeah,
bucket or plastic,
I do like
something.
the plastic storage containers that you can just
And
put a
that
lid on.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
if you've got the right size, you can just standing straight up in the box or whatever, or a transport nuke, and you can put up to 10 or however you want to make that size for you, for how much you want to be lifting it. So
Yeah.
it's very modular when you build those. But the point is that once you're done cutting it out and take out home the honey, you put that bar
Just
right
put the
back
bar
in.
back in. They clean it up immediately.
You don't take anything home.
That's right. And
Ever.
then you don't have to worry about coming back after they've cleaned it up and take
No.
it back off. You just put it on there. They'll clean it up. It'll stay empty wax until they're ready to use it for something else. They may cap some of the top cells because you leave like an inch across there of comb already existing. Like it's perfectly fine. And then there's a guide already in place for the next time they want to go and build comb. You've already left that little strip on there.
Exactly. So there's also the preemptive issue. So I run the Hayes County Beekeepers Association beekeeping store. And so we sell Langstroth and Tabars equipment. So the Tabar equipment, if we already assembled them, they can sit outside. The Langstroth cannot, unless they're painted. Right. Which I don't like painting, by the way, and the top bars don't need it because they're slanted inwards underneath and under the rain cover, so they don't get hit by the sun or by the rain. And they can be twice as thick. So
That's right.
I mean, they are harder to transport marginally, but if you're not a commercial beekeeper, that's completely moot.
Well, also on a top bar, even if you didn't build it twice as thick, it is a 2-person job to move one of those because you got to keep all the bars level. You can't tilt it and have everything fall because it'll break the comb. So you really don't move top bars. Some like Les did, he took them and he did pollination with them, but you don't move them that often.
It's more of like if they're full.
Yeah, it's more like, especially for most of the beekeepers we're going to be talking to here, they're going to set them up in the yard. And if they move it, it might be to the other side of the yard because they figure out that first spot wasn't great, but you're not moving them, like in a commercial operation or a migratory operation. So making them twice as thick and knowing that once you set it down, you never have to go back out there and take boxes off and do other things really doesn't matter at that point.
Well, I will go even further. I cannot lift a Langstroth full much more than a deep, right?
Right.
I mean, so I could, in the equivalent in a top bar, I can also lift a nuke of a top bar. So what I would do is I would transfer them in there and I would do the same thing to a Lang that was too big. I would put them in transport nukes, right?
And break them down into smaller sizes. But guess what that means? More equipment needed to do the job.
And so it's not actually for a non-commercial beekeeper that doesn't have something to lift up those boxes on pallets. There's not really much difference even in transportation because I transport Tabar hives all the time. I might have to do some of that transferring. There's also a way if the legs are high enough, you can drop your tailgate and kind of
slide it in.
Put saw harshes underneath, undo the legs, and then slide it into your pickup truck.
See, everybody, this is a woman who has got some experience on these.
Absolutely.
She has come up with some snazzy little ideas.
Because we do, when our specialty is beekeeping services like turnkey leases, for example, where we bring our own hives onto people's lands and they pay us to maintain them there for the ag exemption. So
which does mean you are moving colonies that normally would not be moved.
Our colonies all the time, full sizes. Yes, it's easier when I have 2 colonies because they can be double. That's another thing. You need less space because a single box can host 2 colonies. And so sometimes I ask less because they're full and they're heavy and I don't want to go and do all that manipulation, which I could. I mean, honestly, even when they're big and full, I put them in 2 or 3 Tabar nukes and I load them up and then I load the hive on the side. So that's not that big of it. I can do it all by myself.
That's right. You just have to be clever.
Exactly.
Resourceful and clever.
But the point with the Hayes County Beekeepers Association, the beekeeping store, is that that's basically a storage container that we've transformed into an online store that you can come to and pick up your equipment. So those Langstroth boxes, you have to buy the equipment ahead of time in bulk if you want to save any money. And then you have to store all that stuff until it's needed. So it's packed to the gill with lots of Langstroth equipment as well. That, you know, if I can go to the McCoy's or whatever, Home Depot, the big box stores, and get a couple of planks of wood and make my hive in less than 2 hours with what I have on site, it's local. I don't depend on the suppliers. I don't depend on the supply chain. When we had this Snowmageddon and all, even COVID, it's kind of put a little bit of restrictions on the supplies that are stored somewhere and we can't get to them. So storage space is also an issue there. You have to kind of order more in bulk so that you can sit on it with Langstroth. You don't have to do that with top bars, but the other aspect of it, yeah, I will go the other way just because I'm totally biased, but I will try to be a little bit more objective. So the space management with Langstroth and top bars, there's a drawback in the top bar if you've got a single colony in there, is that it has a larger footprint where Langstroth can go vertical. And so for one colony to grow upward, you can put more boxes in a small yard than you would be able to necessarily put top bar hives. But in a single top bar hive, you can put several colonies. You cannot do that in a Langstroth, right? You can put partitions and separate entrances. In Hayes County, we've been approved for up to four colonies in one single top bar hive for ag exemptions. Now, as a beekeeper, you know that's too small unless your top bar hive is like really long.
Yeah.
And that's fine. We could do that, but we're trying to make them all the same size so they're fairly transportable.
Uniform, and they fit in the back of the truck.
I was going to say space management. There you go. If you have more than 4 feet long, you're asking for trouble for transportation.
Yep.
Because they're not going to fit between the wheel wells of your truck.
Right.
And potentially not lengthwise either. Now, when you're transporting horizontal hives versus vertical,
yeah, you shouldn't do them. You can, but you shouldn't do them lengthwise. You have to go widthwise from side to side, because otherwise the comb could break.
That's true in the heat of the day. This thing, and that's true if you drive like me. And
so many things to take into consideration.
So usually when we do that, Les and I put it in Les's truck. And I keep the nooks where I can put them in line with the road.
Yeah.
But he has his pickup truck. We put the first two double hives, so that's 4 forward and following the road on the combs. And then the next two, we put them the other way around. We could have put them the same way, but it was easier to put them perpendicular. So we had 8 colonies. And, you know, if you can fit 8 Langstroth hives, I don't think you can fit 8 of them in the bed of a pickup truck. You'd have to stack them as well. Yeah,
they would have to be stacked.
So
and it depends on if there's legs on them or not, because if they have the legs attached and they're not removable, you're only going to get 2 in there. And if the legs are off, you can do 3 or 4 on the bottom and then another 3 or 4 on the top.
We make sure we can undo the legs from the outside.
Yeah, you guys have made yours very, very modular as far as being able to assemble or disassemble easily, or the end pop down so that you can stick a nuke on it and integrate it in.
Exactly.
Yeah, so again, resourceful and clever.
Well, the thing is that I like to simplify my life. So I spend a lot of time up at night trying to think of solutions to not only make it simpler, more practical, more versatile, but also cheaper, right? Because all that stuff, today is the topic of space, but you can build a top bar hive the way we're doing it with reclaimed wood. It doesn't require precision milling. And even if you're buying brand new wood at the expensive cost, we used to be able to do it for $30 for 2 colonies or 3, right? So you save a lot of money. And again, you don't need anything extra.
Yeah.
Now, if you have colonies that are growing bigger, then you can remove partitions and let them grow in there. Yes, they will be limited by the 4 feet, but nothing stops you, if you're not moving your hives, from making them longer. I wouldn't go above 6 feet. I think 5 feet is probably a good size. And you know, if you manage it properly and you remove, you know,
if you're harvesting and doing things like that, then the space shouldn't ever be right. Should not be a problem. So not to be completely 100% top bar here, everybody, there are other ways that you can still be clever and resourceful. So say you've got Langstroth equipment, but you do like the concept of not having to lift the boxes, build a long laying.
That's right.
Make a Langstroth that's
Purchase
long
one.
and horizontal and still use your frames, but then you can get rid of all those extra boxes and all the extra equipment, and you're dealing with a box per colony that functions like a top bar. It doesn't have to be expanded upon. It doesn't have to be contracted. Your frames can stay inside there. So if you take them out and extract them and put them back in and they clean them up, it's fine. It's on that vertical surface. You can also put partitions in there if you need to slow it down, you know, condense the space. You could put more than one colony in there. So you can accomplish all these same tasks, eliminating, yeah, you're still going to have some frames and you may still have to have an extractor, but you've just eliminated a storage shed full of additional medium boxes or deep boxes that you'd have to put out there on these colonies. So there are ways that you can do that, and you can still facilitate space management and condensing things down and make it work to your advantage, and not necessarily have to deal with multiple boxes that have to go somewhere in the winter when you take them back off, you know, and like, oh God, what am I going to do? I'm take out a second mortgage so I can have another building.
Exactly. So I'll do you one even better in the favor of a Langstroth at this point. And if you really, really want frames and you really have invested in those frames and you've built all of them very tediously and all stuff, you don't necessarily want to give up on that. Although I will say that Langstroth equipment retains its value and it's easy to sell it if you're not doing it like John Swan.
If you don't sell it for pennies on the dollar,
it away.
Just make it leave.
Right. But the point is that, you know, you don't necessarily have to have just horizontal Langstroth. They can be pricey or hard to make. But what I would recommend is that if you insist on having Langstroth frames and you insist on having top vertical Langstroths, I would recommend very strongly, in the sake of in the spirit of space management, to have at least one long laying in your yard, because at that point it's a give all take all. When you do those splits, when you do those combination of contracting two colonies together, one was weak or whatever, when you've got a missing frame, you can take one from that long Langstroth and put it anywhere you need it. You can have that colony that could be your
like
give all take all colony.
Yeah.
And even if you don't have enough in that box, in that long Langstroth, it doesn't matter, right? As long as you have that space for the bees,
right?
You could be missing 2 or 3 at the end. It doesn't matter because they haven't built up all the way to there.
Right. They're not gonna do the same as what they do in the 8 or 10 frame box, where if there's a frame missing, they're gonna build comb in that void. Well, there's no void until the end of the box, and they're not going to need it until they've reached that point. So they're not going to go all the way over there, find the empty hole and build a comb just cause, you know.
And for the spirit of space management, let's talk about space management and the nest itself. It's so much easier to manage space in horizontal configurations than it is when you've got a vertical and some horizontal at the same time, which is the case in a vertical Langstroth. So all of a sudden you have your bird's nest, you know exactly where it's at. It's by the entrance. You have one comb of honey usually at the front, then you have your bird's nest, then you have your pollen, and then your honey, right? And then your dry comb. So you know where everything is. And when you're trying to manage the colony for swarming prevention or contractions, or you're mixing two colonies that are too weak together, you can just make space. You can just pull the bar that you need, or the frame that you need. And we do that in top bars, right? So, but you could do that as well. And you would be amazed how much simpler it is to manage in the horizontal line rather than the vertical. You don't have separation between boxes. You don't have to reverse boxes. You don't.
They're also not going to create their brood's nest potentially in the middle of two boxes, to where when you separate a box, you've literally cut the brood's nest in half. Now you don't know if the queen's up in that box or down in this box, and you got to sort through everything. It's very methodical, front to back, when you go through and do your management, or back to front. Technically, we usually start in the rear and work our way up. So you're not worrying about all these other things. You're not worrying about ripping brood in half because they built burr comb in between your top box and your bottom box. You know, like there's all these different things that simplify that process greatly, regardless if it's a long laying or if it's a top bar.
So I'm very biased, not necessarily, yes, towards top bars, but mostly I am biased towards horizontal beekeeping because it's so much easier. It's so much less stressful on the bees as well, because when you're opening it up, you start from the back. and you don't necessarily expose the bird's nest. You don't go in the middle of the bird's nest and crack it open unless you need to.
Right.
And you can also keep either a canvas or boards on top of the frames that you're not looking at right now. You only open a small amount, and that works both with frames and top bars, right?
Yep.
So there's a whole lot of advantages to doing horizontal beekeeping. And yes, if you insist on keeping the frames, which I don't like for many reasons, other reasons, you could do it with a long length strass. So you don't have to go top bar if you want to do horizontal management. And that's something that's very important to know.
Yeah. And so you started off with Langstroths and you like the idea of top bar, but you don't want to invalidate all the stuff that you've already done. Modify some boxes or build a long box, still be able to utilize all of your equipment, still be able to utilize your extractor, but just get rid of the monotony of additional boxes that have to be put on and taken off and done. And it will simplify your life so much.
So much. Yes, it'll be a revelation. And it will also teach you to start managing your bees horizontally, which a lot of our apprentices have done the Langstroth to long Langstroth, horizontal Langstroth transition. And now they're looking at, well, now that I know this works so much better, I'm totally willing to go and look into top bars. And because it's so much cheaper and you don't have to store anything, and it's so much easier to make those top bar hives with very limited woodworking skills.
Yeah.
If you go to our plans on our website with /plans, bee-mindful.com/plans, the plans are for free. You can even watch a video that shows you how one of our students is doing it. And so the simplicity of it makes it so that if I wanted to, if I had the wood already stocked up on site, I could make 10 of them, complete 10 of them in one day, bars and everything.
Yeah.
And that means I could host 20 colonies, if not more.
Right.
And all that for, let's say 10 of them, that would be about $300, $500 to host 20 colonies. There's nothing easier than that. And the other thing, I'm going to switch gear. The other thing is about space management. I want to talk about comb resources. Drawn comb is your gold when you're doing beekeeping, especially if you have several colonies. It's what it allows you to help colonies get a head start or get faster, to give to a swarm, to give to a split some additional resources, to make some space for the queen to lay more eggs, or for the bees to store more honey. So all that stuff, whether it's a top bar or a Langstroth, comb is comb at some point, right? And what do you do with it when you're not, when you don't have it in the hive that the bees are keeping it?
Yeah, and Langstroth, it goes out. You've got to make sure that you got all the moisture out of it. You've got to, a lot of times, freeze it so that if there are any eggs or larvae on there of anything that could be detrimental to it, they die. Then you need to seal it and store it somewhere so that it's not in heat, so it's not going to melt and it's not going to necessarily be fragile. And like, there's so many things that come along with that storing just the comb itself can be a nightmare.
Right. And so when you have larvae or any kind of potentially even pollen, but mostly larvae, if you freeze them, you get rid of some of those issues and whatever. But if you have too many of them, freeze them, thaw them out, store them in a bag or whatever, it's going to be a little bit harder than if you have just pure drawn comb. I recommend freezing only drawn comb without anything in it.
Yeah, that's what I do. Yeah. If it's got brood or something, it needs to stay. I usually don't take that out of there, right? Because that's going to be a mess. And if you did freeze it for some reason, say you had an infestation going on and you took that frame out and you froze it to kill the infestation, well, then you need to put it back in the colony so they can clean it up. But you wouldn't take that and try to store it because that'll actually mold and get nasty. But just from the standpoint of empty comb that you have that you want to use for later, that was the premise of that.
Exactly. But space management wise, you have to be, if you're going to keep it outside of either you're going to keep it in the freezer, which is going to take freezer space, or you're going to store it somewhere else. And then you're going to have to make sure you protect it from mice, wax moths, everything. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If you're going to do frames with combs, that's natural. If you're going to do foundation, mostly, it's not necessarily a Langstroth versus top bar issue here. It's a foundation versus natural comb. So you can freeze both of them, foundation drawn comb and natural drawn comb. But if you're doing cut comb, or crushed comb honey, then you're getting rid of that requirement. You don't have to store that over the
That's true.
winter.
And then
So
you also get an additional valuable resource because at one
yes,
point, Les had said that he made in, I think it was in New Mexico, he oftentimes made more money selling his wax than he did selling his honey. So that's still a valuable resource. People need that. They use it for all kinds of things.
you can do, okay, so you can sell it as is. You can sell it bulk, you can sell it in raw form, or you can do a whole bunch of things. I think that candles is probably too wax intensive for my taste. I think it's a little bit wasteful when it comes to wax usage, but you can do all kinds of things. You can do luminaries, you can do what do you call that? Beeswax wraps, you can do soaps, you can do lip balms, you can do all kinds of stuff. And you can make a lot of money because wax sells for, I don't remember how much, but twice or three times, or maybe even more than that, for compared to honey and things. So it's a lot more valuable than honey is. And again, so I learned something that I didn't know, but how much does 1 pound of wax hold as far as liquid honey is concerned? How much honey?
Oh, now
What's
see,
the
that's
factor?
that's a trick question because when we talk about that whole conversion that it takes 10 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax, you're thinking in blocks. And in reality,
Yes,
that comb is very thin and very thinly spread out on that wax. So
right.
one comb, you've got this thing that measures, if it's in a top bar, it's going probably like 16 to 17 inches across, and it goes down about 7 to 8 inches. You've got this big chunk of comb. If you cut that whole comb off and you melt it down, you
Mhm.
may end up with enough wax to fill up a milk cap. Like, it's
Yes,
ridiculous.
ridiculously.
Yes.
So yes, it takes a lot of nectar for the bees to make the wax they need to use for 1 pound of wax, but 1 pound of wax will host 22 pounds of honey. So they
Yeah.
don't really need that much. To your point, it's ridiculous how much they can stretch it and how light it is on the bar.
Yeah.
Um,
But it holds
so
quite a bit of weight. That bar that weighs basically nothing more than the wood itself
right,
suddenly turns into a 7 pound bar when it's capped full of honey and it's
absolutely.
supported by this thin membrane of wax.
Okay, so that's another space, that's what the space management from the bees. You know what else you can do with that drone comb? You can actually, especially if you don't have enough space in your boxes, whether it's a horizontal or vertical, and you don't have space to put a feeder and you want to put it inside the hive, which is the best thing to do, you could use the drone comb, especially the larger cells that they use for drones or honey, and use whatever sugar syrup that you want to put in the hive, and just kind of put it horizontal and just drizzle it on it until it kind of sinks into the cells. Gently flip it over, do the same thing. And then you can put it vertical. And of course, everything is slanted this way. It's not going to come out. This could be your feeder. The only thing I would caution when you do that is to make sure you don't do it in a time when it's too much robbing, because you do have a lot of syrup exposed.
Yep.
Even if it's inside a hive, bees in the area will smell it, like it's like blood in the water. They're like
Yep.
sharks, right? And they will come. So if you do that, I would make sure that you don't have a big entrance, that you have a very tiny entrance, and the colony that's somewhat strong enough to take care of it. Yeah.
Also, make sure you don't have a huge hive beetle problem either, because wet,
Yes.
sugary comb is going to be a buffet for them if
Right,
it's
right,
not
right.
in track, under control and in check.
Especially if it's had old cocoons in it.
Yes, if
Yeah.
it's older dark comb, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're looking for the protein. So yeah, all that stuff is kind of all linked. There's this, you have to take into account the space of the equipment, the space, the footprint of the hives, the space that you have to transport all this stuff, the space you have to store it in a warehouse or in your garage, and it takes over your life. I don't have anything stored for top bars. Everything that's taking over and overwhelming me is all Langstrasse.
Yep.
The space of the brood nest, how you manage it, the space for storing food, the space to store frozen comb. There's all kinds of things we can do and talk about space when it comes to beekeeping.
That is true. And the funny thing, so the irony is not lost on me that we are having this conversation literally the week of Christmas, where
I
everybody's
know.
going to be getting all this new stuff that
I
they're so
know.
excited about. And here we are going, y'all need to get rid of some of your boxes and make
Y'all need
space
to think this
and
through before
simplify.
you order those Christmas presents. Think this through.
Yeah, unfortunately, too little, too late on that one because they'll
Yeah.
all be getting opened in like 3 days from now. So yeah, that's a fun little oopsie on that one. But it's a good thought process, especially with winter being here for us in the United States.
Mhm.
Thinking about what you want to do to your apiary and changes that you may want to make for the next season, you can spend your off season of the winter building a top bar or building your first long laying
Mhm.
so that you can try this in the spring and see. And you know what? If it's not for you and you want to do it the old fashioned way and you want to pick 20 boxes up and move them, you go for it. More
And
power to you.
if you don't care about your back, then good for you.
Right. If you want to look like the old hunched over beekeepers of the past, that's fine too. It's your body. Do with it as you choose.
We're not here to tell you how to beekeep. We're telling you what we know and from our experience, what makes sense, but to us anyway. The other aspect of things is space. Is if you're anything like me, hi, I'm Nathalie. I'm a bee addict. I'm a
That's
bee
right.
hoarder, right?
Welcome to BAA,
Yeah,
Beekeepers
exactly.
Anonymous.
Then
BA.
you're going to very rapidly run out of space for the colonies because you want to keep in mind intensity and capacity for the area to hold however many colonies. By the way, how you can tell is that if you're constantly feeding your colonies, they don't have enough food. That means you have too many colonies, so you should scale back. I know that we all want to have this many colonies and whatever, especially when we do ag exemption, it might be a requirement. But if you don't have to have a certain number in one area, I would cut back and put them in another area with better forage or spread them out. So there's a couple of things here. Is knowing that for a certain number of colonies, you're going to want to spread them out between different out yards, but also in your own out yard. And John, you can speak to that. And I was doing that on my own out yard, on my own home yard as well. How close to each other do you space them out? And you have them spread out everywhere because it is better for the colonies to be further away.
Yeah. It eliminates drift. When they're all in a line and they all face the same direction, you wind up with drift where the outer colonies are going to get more bees. The inner colonies are always going to be weak and struggling, but that also means that those outer colonies are now exposed to any pathogen or problem or pest or parasite that the inner colonies had because all the foragers went back to the other ones. So by spreading them out, you alleviate some of those things because in nature, they don't build their colonies right side by side. They try to give a good bit of distance between them and the next nearest feral colony out there. So that's actually a very valid point.
Right. So did you know that I just found out as well, because with my apprentices, I'm rereading that very excellent book, The Biology of the Honeybee with Winston. And so I'm kind of gathering more things from it. It's like you reread the book 20 times and you're always going to get something new. That's a very good book. I think I've mentioned it before. That's written from the perspective of the biology, from a biologist, somebody that was not necessarily a beekeeper per se, that was looking objectively at what bees do. And it's a really good book by Winston. But the point is that to your comment, when bees swarm, I was asking as a trivia to my apprentices, and everybody was saying 2 miles away from the mother colony, 5 miles away from the mother colony. Did you know that the preferred distance for a swarm to get away from its mother colony is only a third of a mile?
That's
It's so
interesting.
close, actually.
Yeah.
And kind of that's interesting because you would think that when we talk about moving colonies, you either have to do it within 4 feet or 4 miles or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes against that wisdom tidbit.
Well, it does. So they're not, a third of a mile is still not 4 foot from the next colony.
No,
So
it's not.
you've eliminated drift, but it does make it perplexing on the intensity for the area. So if anybody wants to get more information about this, both here on Patreon and on the main podcast, Les and Nathalie did one of the beekeeping corners. I want to say it was around 7 or 8 that is titled Intensity Thresholds.
Oh yeah,
And
that's right.
you guys go really in depth on how you should have everything set up and those different aspects to consider. But it is interesting to note because the colony is going to forage preferably within a mile radius, a circular mile radius of their colony. If the next colony that splits off of it is only going a third of the mile over,
Right.
there's some drastic overlap there in their mile radius. And so competition for the food sources in those areas are going to go up. And that is a little counterintuitive. That is one of those things, bees are highly intelligent and I always give them a lot of credit, but there's always one thing that has often the logic. They miss logic in one degree. When you look at it from a removal standpoint and you're doing a removal, and you're removing this colony from like the roof line of a house, and you open it up and you can see that it has clearly melted and that colony has absconded or died multiple times over, but yet new colonies keep moving in because it smells like bees. There's remnants of wax there. The pheromones are there. So they're like, oh, it must be a great place to live. They missed that one logic question of, if it's so great, why isn't there still a colony here?
They're missing the time lapse.
Yeah. They didn't stop and say, but then where did everybody go? Or why aren't they still here if it's so wonderful? Like, it's that whole too good to be true scenario sometimes.
Right. So we talked about space where we're evoking time. I think there's a space-time kind of a thing, and
continuum.
the fifth dimension's kicking in here a little bit.
The DeLorean's going to show up in a moment. Right. We're going to go back to the future.
Maybe there are secret little Einsteins over there.
There could be. You never know. There very well could be. Wow. See, so there you go, everybody. Something to think about right before you open up all of your Christmas gifts, all those packages and boxes, and maybe all the beekeeping supplies. No regrets whatsoever, but just food for thought for the off season to go through and consider how you may be able to simplify your life, simplify your beekeeping practices and beekeeping actually activities as you go through and do things, and just see. And you know what? Again, do it. Try one, just one. Doesn't matter what style it is, do one. And then if it works, expand on it. And if it doesn't, that's fine. You still got your other stuff. You can move on with it, and that can just be a novelty or something. And it's great.
And some people like to mess around with little things and try, gadgets, Tinker. And buy all the things in the catalogs and do experiments. And I'm more of a less is more kind of a thing. Less is definitely less is more.
Less is more.
The minimalist and the permissive and minimalist beekeeper. But I find that I don't like to complicate my life. I've already got so many things that I'm doing, and it's not necessarily the case for somebody that's retired and that's got a couple of 3 hives in their backyard and that has a huge storage shed, and so everybody's
disposable income.
Exactly. So do what fits your goals and your philosophy. But if you're looking for simpler and cheaper and lighter, I would say horizontal beekeeping is a lot better, and even cheaper is the top bar, kind of, if you build it yourself or you just buy one that can host several colonies. So
yeah. The only thing that I will say as a final parting thought, when we say horizontal beekeeping, I would initially exclude Layens hives, that specific style, because now you're invalidating both the compatibility of your laying straw and the simplicity of your top bar.
Yes.
You then go and you complicate it and you overcomplicate it because you've got frames that are not standard sizes, that are way bigger and way deeper. They don't go into your extractor.
The honey's on top. So how do you harvest unless you have a huge colony that's well established?
Yeah, I would say stay away from that, because if you go and you just do a search for horizontal hives, you are going to come across Layens hives. And I would say no, focus on long laying or focus on top bar and just use that to get your feet wet. And then afterwards, if you decide you want to venture down that road and you want to be one of those tinkerers that has all the different toys, go for it.
So I have 2 layers, because in our teaching apiary, we're trying to get one of each styles and have 2 of them, because you should always have 2 of each style.
That's how the addiction starts. You can't have just one.
That's how it started. Yeah. And then what I would say, my biggest pet peeve, I mean, it is expensive. It's hard to make yourself. So you depend on the supplier or somebody that's going to build it for you. It's also got the non-standard frames, but mostly it has those non-standard frames.
Yep.
Because not all of a sudden, very few people are going to be able to make those. So it's not just the practicality of extracting or anything like that. Is you really you depend completely on the supplier of those very niche frames.
Yeah, or you're doing weird things like you're zip tying a deep and a medium together to try to equate the same volume. Like I've seen people do some strange stuff, and it's not a great idea.
By the way, don't take a Langstroth frame and flip it 90 degrees to fit in those lay-ins. I have seen whoever shall not be named doing that.
Yes.
And it is not the right orientation for the bees. I cannot believe the damage it must be doing to the colonies. It is so counter to nature.
Yeah, because your plastic foundation is designed to where those hexagonal shapes that are on there, they're already oriented for the bees to draw them out at a specific angle. And if you turn that on its side, they have to then accommodate by drawing it and curving it to go upward so that gravity still takes place. It's extra work, and it's not the natural form and process of things.
Well, worse than that, you put in drawn comb with brood to seed alliance. And
no. Right, because now that's already drawn comb that's going one direction.
And now the bees, how are they going to do the next crop of anything?
Yep. You've messed up because they have that cell at that angle on purpose, and certain bees develop in certain orientations on purpose. The queen hangs upside down. The other, like they're not meant to lay on their side. That's not how that's supposed to work.
So that's something to keep in mind, that it's not, it might kind of work or look like it kind of work, but I think that long term is very detrimental to the health of the colony, and can introduce a whole lot of problems that they already have enough to fend off mites and viruses and all that stuff. So we didn't talk about our other favorite hive, which was the flow hive, and how that could save some space because you have those extraction things and all get stuff.
It saves some space if you think that the commercial is reality.
Yes.
But only if you think the commercial is reality, because in reality, you still, when you buy a flow hive, now we're way off topic here, but when you buy a flow hive, you're getting a very pretty, fancy 10 frame Langstroth deep box. And then you're getting a queen excluder, and then you're getting really expensive frames that go up in this top box, which is the true beauty of the flow hive. That's the actual flow apparatus where you can crack it open. Now, what you're not getting is the box that needs to go in between those two things so that the bees actually have food for themselves. So you're not robbing them blind every time. And you're not using that flow box till the second year. So you take that pretty box and you just put it in storage, and you're going to have basically a Langstroth colony that you use for the first year. Hope they make it into a second box, which you had to supply because it did not come with your flow hive. Then you can put on your queen excluder, and then you can put on your flow apparatus. But when they go through and they fill that up and you crack it open and you make sure that it's good and it can be extracted,
you don't need,
you save all this extra stuff for certain. It can make a mess. And I would actually recommend taking the flow hive off of the colony if you live in an area where it gets really hot, because they will leak. We tested that at Travis County. Mr. Kirkland had one, and he cracked it open, and he showed the honey was so thin because it was so hot. It was moving so fast. It overflowed the drainage channels and seeped out the bottom of the flow frames. So he was losing like a quarter to half a cup of honey.
Had a tray underneath because he knew that was going to happen.
Yep. And if that's inside your colony, what you're doing is you are now flooding the bottom boxes with like a half a cup of honey that's just oozing out of everything.
Drowning of the queen, all this stuff.
I don't know why my colony died.
Exactly. So my thinking on that is that I would get, because they fit on regular Langstroths, so I would get only the Flow Super with and put that on the regular Langstroths.
Save yourself a little bit of money.
But then again, make sure you don't put it right away, because that's too much space for the bees until they need that extra space.
Yeah.
And once you've harvested, in theory, you should actually, unless the season is still going, you should take it out.
The flow apparatus goes away
all winter, because all that heat escapes and is heating up the plastic and not the brood nest underneath. So
you also, just for note, if you put a flow hive together and you leave it all in one thing and you do not manage your colonies, and the colony crashes and wax moths take over, the wax moths will eat up everything down below, and then they will crawl up, and those permanent plastic cells make a perfect place for them to spin their cocoons and go through their pupation, and you will never get those out of the flow frames. So you now have flow frames that have been corrupted by wax moth, cocoon, silk, larva, blah, and it's all destroyed unless you want to sit there with toothpicks and tweezers and try to clean that shit out. And I don't have time for that.
Silky sticky. Yeah, I don't know if you can ever recover it.
Yeah.
How do you? I've never thought about that. Did you?
I had a consultation client that did that.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
And so there's that, and then also when it's full of honey, and you still have to inspect your colony underneath for health. So that
you got to take it off to get down there.
You have to lift up that entire thing or empty it out before you do.
Yep.
And they're super heavy, empty.
Right, because it's a ton of plastic and the wire and metal mechanisms that allow them to shift so that the honey can drain. Heavy. Yeah, they are not. The only thing that a flow hive simplifies is the extraction process. You still have to manage that colony like a normal Langstroth colony. Right. Every couple of weeks, you're taking boxes off, you're going through, you're looking through stuff. It doesn't simplify anything else. In fact, in the regard of taking it off, makes it more difficult.
I'd rather take a frame either with natural comb and cut it out and do cut comb or crush and strain, or one that's got foundation and scrape off.
I've done that before too.
The honey into my buckets as a crush and strain kind of a thing, rather than spending the extra money and then doing the extra lifting and then still have all those issues. Again, less is more.
The last time I extracted honey, I had already cleaned everything up. I was done. And then I moved a box and there were 3 deep frames of capped honey, but just 3. And I was like, first off, it's going to be out of balance. I'm ultimately not going to be able to get all 3 of them done at once. I don't want to clean up all that crap again. So that's exactly what I did. I took the Hive tool and I just gouged everything off of it into a bucket like I was doing crush and strain.
Those pastry cutters are great. They're just going to scrape just right there. It's super easy. I mean, I cannot stand extractors, to be honest with you. I don't like the cleaning. I don't like having to store them space wise.
Yep.
And you only need them once in a season, basically. And it's just
if you're me, because you don't want to clean it multiple times, yes. But if you extract in different phases at different times of the season, you're getting it out, you're getting it prepped, you're using it, you're cleaning it, you're storing it, you're getting it back out, you're getting it prepped.
Right. I also find that you lose a lot of honey to the extractor that coats inside.
Well, because it also, even if you let it sit there for a day, you're running the risk of the honey drawing moisture, but everything is now down in the bottom, but that bottom, it kind of curves and it's not going to be at the actual opening. So then you've got to tilt it, and even still tilting it, you still got honey that's down around the very bottom of that's not going to come up and go out the honey gate. So yeah, you do still lose honey too.
I find it wasteful from that standpoint. And even if you let the bees clean it off, they die, they get stuck in there. They just kind of,
You know what though? Ultimately what it boils down to, there is something viscerally gratifying with crushing comb with your hands. Just taking it, just smashing it and let it run over.
There's something to be said also by, if you got a little bit of pollen in there, and it's just the floral aspect of things, it's just so good. I find it tastes a lot better personally.
And it is going to have more higher pollen content in it too, because as you're crushing that, everything kind of comes out and gets mixed in together. So you're going to have bigger granules of pollen and things mixed in with your honey, which makes it closer to the more natural aspect of it too. So
another point, if you have a bunch of honey that you're not going to consume right away, put it in smaller jars and freeze it.
Yes.
So freezer space is going to be needed, but you will keep the freshness of your honey much longer, and it will not granulate on you. Like those pollen particles and all the stuff will lead to faster crystallization. It will not happen when you put it in the freezer, or at least so much slower that you should be fine.
Yeah, very true. Wow. See, look at all that wonderful information for everybody out there. I hope that you all have a wonderful holiday season, and whatever you celebrate and however you celebrate, I hope that your holidays are just fantastic. And we will definitely be talking to everybody here between the holidays, and we'll see what that'll look like. I don't know what it's going to look like, but we'll put something out there. I think it might be maybe pros and cons of things that maybe we would have done differently, which actually we hit on a lot of those in here.
We did.
So those are kind of just the different little aspects to take in mind there. But enjoy your holidays, spend time with your friends, with your family, celebrate
Your
however
loved
you
ones.
celebrate. Your
Yeah.
loved one, that's right. Sometimes it's the family we choose versus the other. They're more entertaining.
And be mindful of your actions and how you live your life.
That's right. And how you treat others.
That's right.
All right. Be good, everybody.
Be mindful.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This Hive Jive production was made possible by amazing patrons like you, and we appreciate your support. To all our Hive Jive junkies out there, you truly are the bee's knees.